Artemis I, officially Artemis I and formerly known as Exploration Mission 1, is a planned uncrewed moon orbiting mission and the first spaceflight in NASA's Artemis program. It is also the first flight of the agency's Space Launch System rocket and the complete Orion spacecraft. The launch was originally scheduled for August 29, 2022, but technical difficulties and uncertainty about the weather forced a cancellation. The test flight is currently scheduled to launch on September 2, 2022, at 16:48 Coordinated Universal Time from the Kennedy Space Center's Launch Complex 39B, from which Apollo 10 was launched 53 years before. Artemis I will last for 6 weeks and will test all the rocket stages and spacecraft that would be used in later Artemis missions. After reaching orbit and performing a trans-lunar injection, the mission will deploy 10 CubeSat satellites and the Orion spacecraft will enter a distant retrograde orbit for 6 days. The Orion spacecraft will then return and re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, protected by its heat shield, and splash down in the Pacific Ocean. The original launch date of Artemis I was planned in December 2016, but it was delayed at least 16 times due to technical issues with the SLS and the Orion spacecraft. Other factors contributing to the delays are the cost overruns and budget limits imposed by the federal government. After the Artemis I mission, Artemis II will perform a crewed lunar flyby and Artemis III will perform a crewed lunar landing, 5 decades after the last Apollo mission. The Artemis program is not the first reincarnation of American crewed lunar exploration after the Apollo program. In 1989, at the 20th anniversary of Apollo 11's lunar landing, then-President George H.W. Bush announced the Space Exploration Initiative, which aimed to launch astronauts back to the Moon and Mars. A report released 90 days later estimated the Space Exploration Initiative would cost $500 billion. This alerted Congress to the high cost, and funding for the full proposal was rejected. 15 years later, in 2005, George W. Bush established the Constellation program, aiming to return humans to the Moon by 2020. The program developed the Ares I and V rockets that would carry the Altair lander and the Orion spacecraft, and even launched a flight test of the Ares I and Orion spacecraft. Like its predecessor, the program was cancelled by then-President Barack Obama in February 2010, citing cost and timeline overruns. The Constellation program is considered to be the Artemis program's spiritual predecessor, because its Orion spacecraft was kept in development after the program's demise, and would eventually become a part of the Artemis program. In the NASA Authorization Act of 2010 passed in September, Congress mandated that a new shuttle-derived vehicle must be built that leverages existing contracts. This launch vehicle would be known as the Space Launch System, abbreviated as SLS. The act mandated that the crewed launch of SLS must happen before December 31, 2016, so NASA in 2011 originally planned to conduct 2 test flights of the launch vehicle beforehand, one with a non-functional Orion spacecraft and another with a functional spacecraft. Around September 2011, SLS's first launch was delayed from before the end of 2016 to sometime in 2017, the first of at least 15 more delays. A year later in 2012, the SLS's first and second launches were named Exploration Mission 1 and 2, abbreviated as M1 and M2. In January 2013, the Orion spacecraft service module was announced to be built by the European Space Agency and was named the European Service Module. Even though the European Space Agency encountered many technical challenges in constructing the module, the agency by January 2014 still affirmed that the module would be ready by the end of 2017. The SLS passed its key decision point C in August 2014 and the welding machine at the Mashhad assembly facility for the SLS's core stage was opened a month later, though a tower misalignment was found soon afterwards. Both of these factors contributed to the delay of the first launch timeline to no later than November 2018. In mid-November 2014, construction of the SLS core stage using the welding machine finally began. In December 2014, the first flight test of the Orion spacecraft took place under the Exploration Flight Test 1 on a Delta IV Heavy rocket, in which its re-entry was successful. 2 qualification motor 1 and 2, similar to SLS's solid rocket boosters, were successfully test-fired in March 2015 and June 2016. In February 2017, NASA investigated a crewed launch as the first SLS flight. It would have had a crew of 2 astronauts and the flight time would have been shorter than the uncrewed version. After a months-long feasibility study, NASA rejected the proposal because of the high cost and continued with the plan to fly the first SLS mission uncrewed. In July 2017, Artemis I's interim cryogenic propulsion stage became the first part of the SLS to be delivered to the Kennedy Space Center. About 4 months later, in November, the earliest launch date of the Exploration Mission 1 was expected to be in December 2019, with a high probability of launch in mid-2020, 3 years since the original mandated launch date. On December 11, 2017, then-President Donald Trump signed the Space Policy Directive 1, effectively formalizing the Lunar Human Exploration Program. Originally, the SLS version used on the first, second and third missions was planned to use the SLS's exploration upper stage. However, due to the stage's extreme delays, in April 2018 NASA decided to switch from Block 1B to the less powerful Block 1 SLS for these 3 missions. The exploration upper stage will be used instead from the SLS's fourth mission onwards. In the NASA Office of Inspector General October 2018 report, it was discovered that Boeing would need $8.9 billion to complete the Exploration Mission 1's core stage, twice the maximum allowance by NASA. The report also mentioned Boeing's poor performance and over-optimistic budget projections, and NASA's poor management of contractors. By this time, the first launch had been delayed to June 2020. In March 2019, then NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine proposed moving the Orion spacecraft from SLS to commercial rockets, either the Falcon Heavy or Delta IV Heavy, to comply with the schedule. The mission would require 2 launches, one to place the Orion spacecraft into orbit around the Earth, and a second carrying an upper stage. The 2 would then dock while in Earth orbit, and the upper stage would ignite to send Orion to the Moon. By April 2019, $17 billion has been spent on the SLS, far more than originally expected. This was partly possible due to the manufacturing companies and NASA using cost-plus contracts, allowing the companies to ask for more money even if caused by delays and overspending. The Moon program was officially named Artemis in May 2019, reflecting goddess Artemis as the twin sister of Apollo in Greek mythology. Artemis I's main objective is to achieve a safe capsule atmospheric entry, descent, splashdown and recovery. Artemis I will be launched on the Block 1 variant of the Space Launch System. The Block 1 first stage consists of a core stage and 2 5-segment solid rocket boosters. The core stage uses 4 RS-25D engines, all of which have previously flown on space shuttle missions. The core and boosters together produce 39,000 kilonewtons of thrust at liftoff. The upper stage, known as the Interim Cryogenic Propulsion Stage, is based on the Delta Cryogenic second stage and is powered by a single RL-10B-2 engine. Once in orbit, the ICPS will perform a trans-lunar injection burn, which will place the Orion spacecraft and 10 CubeSats on a trajectory to the Moon. Orion will then separate from the ICPS and coast to lunar space. Following Orion separation, the ICPS stage adapter will deploy 10 CubeSats that will do scientific research and perform technology demonstrations. Originally, the mission was planned to follow a circumlunar trajectory without entering orbit around the Moon. Plans after 2015 shifted to have the Orion spacecraft spend approximately 3 weeks in space, including 6 days in a distant retrograde orbit around the Moon. After 2 weeks in space, the capsule will burn and orbit 800 kilometers above the Moon, gravity slingshot the spacecraft back to Earth.